I'm speaking with General Uzi Dayan about the Arab-Israeli conflict. As one of Israel's highest-ranking military officials, General Dayan has a lot of experience with that conflict. He's a major general in the Israel Defense Force, now on reserve. He served as Deputy Chief of Staff of the IDF and also as National Security Advisor to Prime Ministers Ehud Barak and Ariel Sharon. He's also been the top commander of many operational units and intelligence units of the IDF. He's also participated in peace talks with the Syrians, the Jordanians, and the Palestinian Arabs. He's also the leader of a new political party in Israel called the S.O.T.M.E Party, which is trying to bring about major changes in Israel in both the security area and the socio-economic area. General Dayan is a nephew of Moshe Dayan, who served as Israel's defense minister during the Six-Day War in 1967. He's currently visiting the Bay Area on a mission for the Jewish National Fund. General Dayan, let's start talking about the Gaza Strip. A lot of people say that what's going on there is a war. Hamas is firing rockets and missiles at Jewish towns almost every day. Would you describe the situation as a war?
Sure, it is a war, and the Israeli government should understand that this is a war. Actually, it's more than a war. I mean, if you come to Israel, you have a special deal. You got two wars in one ticket. One is the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, talking about territory, borders, status of Jerusalem, refugees, who control the airspace. And this is a real conflict, but it might be settled years from here, I mean, in the coming years, because we don't really want to rule the Palestinians. We want to be a Jewish democratic state. So it's not a 100% conflict, but there is another conflict which is a war.
And which is that?
This is the war between the fundamental Islamic organizations, armed militia like Hezbollah and Hamas. This is a war because they have nothing to do with two states or two people. What they want is to chase the Jews all the way to Jerusalem. This is a war against the existence of a Jewish entity in the Middle East, and it's about time to understand that even if we evacuate Gaza Strip to the last inch, they continue this war. Even some Israelis think that if we'll evacuate the West Bank, Judah and Samaria, to the 67 line, it will be the end of it. No, it won't be the end of it, because this war against the Jewish entity by Hamas and Hezbollah didn't start at 67. It won't end until we will dismantle these organizations.
So what should Israel's objectives be in this war? When you go to war, the first thing you have to do is define what your objectives are. So you're saying that the goal should be to dismantle Hamas?
First of all, if you go to a war, you have to win it. I'm sorry to remind it, but you know, a war, unlike a sport, the idea is to win, not to participate.
No, I've heard
and here we have to understand that the only way is to dismantle the Hamas leadership, the Hamas as an organization, because the organizations like the Hamas and the Hezbollah are not a part of the solution. They are the problem.
And how would Israel do that? How would it go about dismantling Hamas?
What we have to do now, it's not try to fighting these two wars in the same time and think about what will be years from now with the Palestinians. We have to provide security to the Israeli people. To the Israeli people in S.O.T.M.E, in Ashkelon. You know, the Qassam rockets, now the Katyusha rockets cover Beersheba and Ashdod as well. The way to do it is, one, to isolate Gaza Strip, to return to the Israeli-Egyptian border that we evacuated. It was a mistake. We have to return there. If not, we get the Hamas as Hezbollah number 2 very soon. 3, to expand the targeting and to go after the Hamas target, the Hamas government target, including the Hamas officials, including Prime Minister, Hamas Prime Minister Ismail Haniyeh, and then to go and chase all the Qassam rockets and the Katyusha rockets launcher wherever they are.
Now, some Israelis say that it would be difficult to dismantle Hamas without killing a lot of Palestinian civilians because they deliberately hide among those civilians. So how valuable should Israel regard the lives of those civilians when it's going after Hamas? Should it discount them altogether, or should it allow them to protect Hamas?
The only way is to understand that if you're fighting somebody who is fighting in such a dirty war, it doesn't mean that you have to be as dirty as him, but on the other end, you have to think about your own people, you know, talking about human rights. The basic human right is to live. Now, it has to be, I don't know, balanced in a way. We must not go on the Palestinian civilians, you know, just in order to kill Palestinian civilians, even if it's make a deterioration, deterrence. On the other hand, if there are among the civilians, we have to do our best to go as accurate as possible on the Hamas targets.
Now, I've heard some Israelis say that the war can't be won, it can't be solved militarily. Do you subscribe to that, or do you think that if Israel would fight the war to win, it would succeed?
Well, this is bullshit. There is no other way if you go to a war but to win a war. If you don't intend to win it, don't go into the kitchen. And I think that Israel could beat the Hezbollah in Lebanon. And what we didn't do in Lebanon, we have to do in Gaza Strip today. And it's a 45-kilometer strip. It's not an enormous area. We can isolate it. We can go. We can enter that. It's not a piece of cake. Not something to cheer about. But we have to do it. You know why? It's not only providing security to the people in Sderot. Is that the Israelis are starting to ask an annoying question, which refer directly to the national security. And they say in a very simple way, say, if those people in Jerusalem, if they can't beat the Hezbollah, if they can't give a military response to the simple, primitive Qassam rocket threat, how are they going to cope with the Iranian atomic threat? This is a very simple question, but we have to answer. The only way to answer it is to give a military response, a military solution to the Qassam rockets. I'm not a guy who thinks that, that military force can solve everything. Far from that. But on the other hand, diplomacy, just diplomacy won't solve it. And there is no way to talk to the Hamas. I'm not talking about principally not to talk to the Hamas, but what are we going to talk about? If it's about ceasefire, all they have to do is to cease fire. Israel won't continue to target in Gaza if the Hamas cease fire. What usually happens is that we cease and they continue to fire.
Well,
if we are talking about something in the future, say about solution, what are we going to talk with the Hamas about? About 3 states for 2 people?
Well, let's say Israel goes into the Gaza Strip and it succeeds in defeating Hamas. What then? Should Israel stay in Gaza, resettle it, or should it pull out again, in which case Arabs will run it again and there wouldn't be much preventing another terrorist group from taking charge?
It's a good question, but let me first of all say, now it's high time to provide security to the Israeli people. And what are we going to do next? If you ask me, the next phase after providing security, after dismantling the Hamas organization, is to show to the Palestinians there is other way. Now, if Mahmoud Abbas could deliver and take over Gaza Strip, it's better. But then he will have to deliver fighting terrorism. He failed to do it so far.
Is there any reason?
If there is no other entity, organization, leader that can take over and make not only a historic compromise but can deliver it too, we'll have to stay there or to go inside and to react in a way that will give security to the Israeli people if it's going to take some years.
Well, do you see any evidence that the Palestinians could govern themselves at all with any faction that could live peacefully with Israel. Like as far as Mahmoud Abbas, I've heard him say many times that he's not going to make peace with Israel unless Arabs get the return of right into Israel proper, which is obviously intended to end the Jewish majority in the state. So can we accept him claiming that he's willing to make real peace?
I don't know. I'm not sure about. I know Mahmoud Abbas from the talks with the Palestinians. He is not the same terrorist as Arafat was. But I don't care because he can't deliver, and I'm kind of sick and tired of thinking of, the usual question or in Israel, the usual dilemma, maybe he can, but he doesn't want, or maybe he wants, but he can't deliver. I don't know. We have to wait until there is a leadership on the other side that can make historic compromise and in the same time deliver it. As far as we don't have such a leadership, we can't make such a leadership. What we have to do is to provide security to our people, and we are strong enough to do it.
Now Israel is pursuing a policy of propping up Abbas. It gives him money, it gives him arms, it provides training. Now the United States and Israel gave a lot of aid to Abbas in the Gaza Strip in order to be a bulwark against Hamas, but instead Hamas ran them out of town in about 2 weeks, and they got all the arms that Israel supplied them. So do you think Israel can put its trust in Abbas for anything?
We have to trust only ourselves, what we got, the Israeli idea, the General Security Service. We can't trust somebody else. The other end, it's better that there will be somebody that we can hand it over to him, because we don't want to rule the Palestinians from now to the rest of the time. Why so? Because if this is the Israeli dilemma. We want our children to live in a Jewish democratic state and not in a binational one. The only way to do it is to provide security to the Israelis and at the same time thinking about the future to go to a territorial compromise, a minimal territorial compromise, which will permit us to retain Israeli or Jewish solid majority in Israel in a legal and moral way. But right now, everything now is about to provide security. First of all, we have to provide security. If we succeed in it, we can think about returning to a kind of initial disengagement, a minimal, not the one that was done in Gaza. But to be frank about it, this is not the coming years. The coming years is to provide security to the Israeli people and to regain the Israeli deterrence.
Now it seems that there are a couple of major threats that Israel faces. Right now the policy seems to be to avoid the demographic problem, to sever every piece of Israel that has too many Arabs. The problem with that is that after Israel gives up this territory, whatever land remains to Israel is still going to have a lot of Arabs in it. And so assuming that the Arab birth rate is higher than the Jewish birth rate, in a few years you're going to be back to the same problem except with less land to give away.
No, these are not the facts. Actually, the number of minorities in Israel is about 19.7%, let's say 20%. The percentage of Muslim Arabs is only about 13%, 13%. The other are Druze, Palestinians in East Jerusalem, Christians, for example, their birth rate is lower than the Jewish birth rate, and their educational level is higher than the Jewish one. But even if I return to the 20% minorities, that's going to be about 24% by the year of 2020. It's going to be almost 33% by the year of 2050. And this is enough time for a democratic country to make the right policy, and the 80% Jews in Israel don't have to be afraid all the time, to worry all the time that they are becoming a minority. It won't happen. By the way, the Jews are 80% of the population of Israel, and the same percentage remained from 49 all along the history. It's true that there were wars, there were a lot of aliyah, new immigrants coming to Israel. So it's in our hand. And I think that Israel, as a Jewish democratic state, should remain Jewish, meaning Jewish solid majority, but in the same time having a democratic regime for all its citizens.
But if the Arab population continues to increase, even if it doesn't become an absolute majority, they can largely exercise a veto power over what the Israeli government can do.
They can't. It hasn't been changed for 60 years now. But what I'm saying is that we have to adopt a policy vis-a-vis this threat. For example, their education, governing, a better governing in Israel, and what we can do is to set up a policy that will assure us that this percentage will stay. For example, the right of return to Jews to Israel, and then not to let, we can't tell people not to have children, but we don't have to encourage it the way we do it today in the state. So I'm saying it's in our hand, and the democratic, a Jewish democratic state can continue forever with 80% Jews and 20% minorities.
Now, is the Arab minority really going to be loyal to the state? It seems like the more powerful Hamas gets and the weaker Israel is in its response, the more the Israeli Arabs identify with the party that seems to be getting stronger, namely Hamas.
That's true.
So
That's
is there any evidence that this population can really be trusted, or they'll really accept that they are a minority in a Jewish state and they're not going to turn it into an Arab or an Islamic state?
You're right. I mean, we have to be very careful here, and Israel has all the right to remain Jewish, a democratic state. Now, the Israeli or the minorities in Israel, as I said, 20%, only 13% of them are Israeli Arab Muslims. And we have to adopt a policy that makes sure, by the way, a democratic country don't doubt all the time whether you are loyal or not. What we have to do is, one, to improve the education. Two, it's to, in top of having military service, to establish a kind of national civilian service to all those people who don't serve in the military. And by the way, most of them are not Arab. Many of them are ultra-Orthodox Jews. And then to make sure, for example, we need, I think that the Israeli educational system need to pose a core of education in Israel, which means everybody will learn the Israeli history, English, mathematics, and so on. When they are grown up, they go to the Israeli market with the toolbox that it needed to be a citizen that is not only loyal, but have the equal opportunity. He can get a job, he can do everything in Israel, and the minorities in Israel, actually the portion of the Israeli society in which we have a problem with, it's about 13 to 18% Israeli Arab, and about 11% Israeli ultra-Orthodox who don't serve, for example, in the military service.
Well, Arabs are represented in the Israeli Knesset. I think there's something like 10 Arabs serving in the Knesset now, out of 120. Now, these were elected by their Arab constituency, so the question is, are these Arab Knesset members...
Actually, in those Arab parties, there are also Jewish people.
Right. But are these Arab Knesset members loyal to the state? I see them openly praising Israel's enemies, openly taking the side of Israel's enemies, and expressing the wish for more terrorist attacks on Jews. That's like the United States Senator praising Al-Qaeda and wishing they would do more of it.
It is. By the way, I'm not sure that that the situation is much better here than in Israel. But you're right that in a Jewish democratic state, it drives you crazy to see some leaders of the Arab communities in Israel who are kind of supporting publicly Israeli enemies, and I think that we have to be tougher on that. By the way, I can tell you that the Arab Israelis are not very much satisfied with that, and not because they are Zionists, but because they say our leaders in the Knesset, they fight about national issues all the time, and we don't get better education, better sewage, infrastructure, and so on. So there is a way to be more tough or tougher about it in Israel, but I don't see it as a threat on the existence of the state of Israel.
Now, when Israel captured all those territories in 1967, it tried to increase the well-being of the Palestinians in those areas in the hopes that they would make them more friendly to Israel. So it built schools where none had been before. It provided employment opportunities that haven't been there before, but they don't seem to have earned much gratitude for it. Today, they have a culture that's based on hatred of Jews. Every Arab school child is taught that his noblest aspiration is to be a suicide bomber. So what did all that trying to help them really accomplish?
First of all, by the way, I don't think that Israel really did so much in those areas. Talking about infrastructure, education, law, rule of law, etc. I think that Israel actually neglected many of the peripheries, including Judea and Samaria. But I fully agree with you that it won't happen. It won't help, even if we invest more and we try very much to give them better quality of life. It won't help because this is a national conflict. So
you can't buy them off, in other words, by giving them things.
I think that it can help once, if there is two states for two people. We have to be more careful that the other state won't be a third world next to a high-tech state, which means Israeli state. Now it's not the point. We are not in this situation at all. Now we have to fight and to provide security to our people. We have to keep the human rights to a way, to a degree that we don't. There is a difference between the let's say the Hamas leaders and the Palestinian people. That we don't. The Palestinians has to understand that we don't fight the Palestinians because they are Palestinians. We fight the terrorists. We fight their leaders, the people who send them, the people who support it. This is the kind of a war in our region. And talking about better economy and better quality of life, it will help only if there will be a kind of a solution. I mean, I'm not talking about peace right now, I'm talking about coexistence in our area.
Well, a lot of people don't quite understand why Israel is so restrained in its response to the rocket attacks. Most countries would not stand for it for 5 minutes. They're attacked by missiles almost every day. The army has the ability to put a stop to it, but the government refuses to allow it to do so. So what's going on? Why are they holding back so much?
Because we need a much better leadership in Israel. It's not a question that should be posed to me. I think that Israel should be much more determined here. I think that there is no other way but to provide security to the people, and much better security. It's become a national, as I said, national security issue. And I think that Israel needs a much more experienced and determined leadership in order to do that.
Well, it's interesting that you raised that point because you recently started your own political party called the S.O.T.M.E Party, which means turning point in Hebrew. So how is your party different from the established parties? Or if your party became so popular that you became prime minister, what would you do differently from what the government is doing now?
Well, in a nutshell, we talk about providing security to the Israeli people in a much more determined way, but in the same time, raise the two flags. You know, you mentioned my uncle, late Uncle Moshe Dayan. He once said in Israel that we can't raise two flags in the same time. We can raise only one flag, and we choose it to be the national security flag. So it's about time that maybe one of the family will correct the historic mistake. We have to raise two flags, and what we are saying is that now, 1.5 years after the Second War in Lebanon, education, closing the gaps in the Israeli society and promoting the periphery is not less important than the national security. Finally, what we are saying that we need a young, new, and much better leadership. And one of the issues that we are fighting against in Israel is corruption. So in a nutshell, what I would have done is being much more determined on security, on national security, making education national goal #1 in the same time, and regroup a new leadership with people from the Israeli politics, from other places that they have, I don't know, brain, Jewish art, and clean hands.
Now, you mentioned education. Is there something wrong with Israeli education now? I mean, let's say you get to the point that every student learns the basic skills, reading and writing and mathematics and all those. Is that enough, or are you talking about something else, some other type of...
I'm talking about something which I don't want to use the word revolution, but this is a very deep reform which is needed. The Israeli achievements deteriorate in the last 30 years. We were in first place in Europe in 62, 63. Now we are in 39th place out of 53 countries.
For public school, you mean?
No, I mean mathematics and science by the age of 13, for example. We have to be much better in our mother language, I mean Hebrew. I'm talking also about values. I'm talking about educational system which is more Jewish and more democratic in the same time. And we have to be much better, and we can do it well. You know, we are part of a nation that Tinokot shel Bet Rabban, kids of 4 or 5 years old, in 5 generations from now knew how to read and write when the outer world was 90% illiterate. So we have to do much better. I'm talking here about values, being more Jewish and more democratic. I'm talking about achievements, and this is something I think that
now you mentioned
education should be national goal #1 in Israel. It's not the case right now.
Now you mentioned being more Jewish and more democratic. Sometimes those values might conflict. If you do something that makes it more democratic, it might make it less Jewish, and vice versa. So if those values are in conflict...
Do you really believe in it? I mean, do you think that Judaism and democracy conflict?
Well, for example, if Arabs have the same voting rights as Jews, that gives you more democracy, but less Jewishness.
I'm talking about Jewish democratic state, and you know, the way to do it, it's that educating the people, I mean the Jews, has to be in a more Jewish way. What happens in Israel, that the Zionists, the secular Zionist movement, choose the Bible to be the ethos. Going the desert, if or went from Egypt to the promised land, the prophets, the kings, the prophets, and then we make a huge jump from the Bible to the independence war and erase 2,000 years of Jewish civilization. That's what I mean by being more Jewish, to be a part of a nation, because most Israelis, you can see it here, most of the Israelis who define themselves as being not less of, first of all, Jewish and then Israelis, when they live abroad, places like the United States of America, they are not really a part of the Jewish community. Why so? Because they are very much, the ethos is the Bible, it's the land of Israel, but when you start to talk about 2,000 years of Jewish civilization, they are not there. They are kind of the newborn Israeli. This is the gap. This is the missing link that we have to fill. And talking about democracy, we can be more democratic.
But you're saying that Israel should return to more traditional Jewish values?
Sure. And in the same time, take our Knesset. If we talk about politics, 2/3 of the Israeli Knesset members weren't elected by people. They were put in lists, and the lists went to democratic election. So what we have to do, for example, is to adopt a regional, national election system.
So you're talking about reforms in the electoral system. So instead of just voting for a party list, you're voting for a person, and then that person is responsible to his constituents, the people who voted
not really.
for him?
I think that they have to vote for a party, but every party should have his own representative in every region. So you know who we are voting for, and this is to return, to bring back the power to the voter. Right now, 2/3 of the Israeli parliament wasn't elected. The Knesset member weren't elected by people. They were just put in list. I want the voter, when he go and choose a party, also to have influence of who is the Knesset member who is representing him.
Now, is there a lot of organized opposition to this? It's not easy to change a political system because,
it's not easy to
because
make
people
any
say,
changes.
how will this affect me?
Look, it's not easy to make changes. Not easy to make a turning point. But this is what Israel needs now. We need, we live in a paradox, Israel, and it's all in our hand. 3 parts of this paradox. One is we are a very strong country, but it seems that, as you said, that we don't really give enough personal security and sense of security to the Israeli people. 2, the Israeli economy is in very good shape. It's not a poor country, but it seems that years ago there was a poor country with some rich people. Now it's the other way around. The country is rich, but many of the people are poor. So we have to use this wealth to the benefit of the whole Israeli society. And 3, we have fine people in Israel, but it seems that they are not in the right places. And the only way to make the change which we need is 2 channels. 1, education. 2, politics. It's not an easy way. It's not easy to make changes, but this is what we have to do, and this is what leadership is all about.
Well, it seems to me that the loss of traditional Jewish values actually weakens Israel's hold on the land because people can't explain why they have the right to be there. The Arabs say, you Jews are illegally occupying land that rightfully belongs to us Arabs, and many of the Israelis are unable to answer them. They have nothing to say to them, so it appears to the world that the Arabs are correct. So how should Israelis answer that when Arabs say, you're occupying our land, it's our land, you stole it from us? How should an Israeli respond to that?
One, you're right. We have to go back to our roots, to our tradition, not only the Bible, but the 2,000 years that separate us from this time, the Bible time. But I don't worry so much about the point that you raised. I think that it's not a matter of how we explain it to the outer world or to the Arabs. It's the way how we explain it to our own people. And what's happening in Israel, I think that the Israeli Barak, explanatory, the way we explain to everybody, what is problematic is that on every issue in Israel, you can hear 3 different voices from the same government. So it's what do we want, what we insist on, We have to be strong. It's the only way to live in our neighborhood. If you are strong, there are some issues that you are not allowed to give up. and you don't have to give up because you're strong. On the other hand, you can be more flexible on other issues, even more generous. Why? Because you're strong. So what we have to do is to work much more on the cohesion of the Israeli society. And that's me being now here in California. When I was the National Security Advisor, I once had a kind of a discussion or difference with Prime Minister Sharon about what is the Israeli strategic asset. And I said, look, Sharon, the Israeli strategic asset is our relations with the Jewish communities. So in this matter that you mentioned, we have to work about it, but you can be very much of support, because it's not only a question of the Israelis, it's an issue of the Jewish people.